Okay.
You put your voice in there, and then it magnifies it.
Cool. Thanks. Hello, folks. I'm George Eberts, and you guys have never seen this movie before. Neither have I. Evidently, nobody in this room or town has ever seen this movie. So
There we go.
that puts us all on a kind of a level playing field, I guess. But there's not much about the moon actually in the movie. In fact, I think the only thing about the moon that's in the movie is the name of the moon is in the name of the movie. But there's two people in town that have probably gazed at the moon, watching it rise, cross the sky, set, conjunct with stars and planets, more than anyone else, and that's me and Tom. So that's our credentials for doing this, I guess. I think the moon is in the name of the movie because the moon is commonly associated with extra supernatural human powers. And we all know about lunatics. That was the people suffering from insanity used to be thought to be under the influence of the moon, and some people who are extraordinarily bright and intuitive geniuses are also thought to be under the influence of the moon. That's the kind of people that are in the movie we're going to see. So there's lunatics and there's intuitive geniuses. There's the rest of us in between. I think all of us share some sense of the moon in our lives. You've watched it out the kitchen window while you're doing dishes. It's been in the sky when you got up to go to work in the morning. All of us have our own personal moons that we've wondered about, gazed at. So what we'd like to start talking about is people having their own relationship with the moon, what the moon can mean to you, and how you can enjoy it more, how to develop your own personal relationship with the moon on 2 or 3 different levels. And then we're going to talk about what it's always meant to the human race in terms of archaeoastronomy. That is Tom's specialty. And he and I have had the pleasure of chasing the shadow of the moon all over the planet. We got a little bit of information and hopefully inspiration about eclipses to finish up with, and that should take us all of the 20 minutes that we're supposed to use. So what about your own personal relationship with the moon? Other than just seeing it out the window, what can you get out of it? Well, the first thing I can suggest is that people stop somewhere between the car and the door and stand there for a minute, look up at the night sky and see what the moon is doing. So maybe it's particularly beautiful that night. That means you don't have to go right in. You can find a lawn chair out on the back porch, or you can lay out on your back on the picnic table like I used to do. Because sometimes the moon in the night sky, especially when it's mixed with some clouds, is one of the most beautiful things you'll ever see in nature. And so often we walk, like I said, from the car to the house or from the house to the car and don't stop and enjoy it. A few years ago, I came out from my day job at the state psychiatric hospital. I had to go to a meeting over town. There were a dozen or so people in the parking lot. The day shift had just gotten off. And these people are standing around in small groups. They're talking to each other, smoking cigarettes, checking their phones. And I glanced up in the sky and wow, 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 wow. There was like double rainbow around the sun. There were parhelic arcs and tangential arcs and circumzenithal arcs, and about half of them were in vivid color. It was a crystal, spectacular light show, free, natural, right overhead, and most of the people in that parking lot were missing it because they're just looking down at their phones or their cars or each other. So the first thing you can do to develop a relationship with the moon is to look at it once in a while and spend a little extra time when it's beautiful. Can you see the moonbeams coming through holes in the clouds and the edges of the clouds colored with silver and gold? This is really cool. You only get a limited number of nights like that in your life. And you can't add any more. You can subtract them by not watching. So I hope just get in the habit of doing that, watching a beautiful moonrise or a beautiful moon set, that kind of thing. And that takes you to the next layer of possible involvement here, which is to be familiar with the phases of the moon. Sometimes it's a crescent, sometimes it's half, it's full, it's in the sky at different times. Sometimes you can anticipate when it's going to rise or set, and that can be beautiful things. And I can't begin to tell you why this brings you joy. It just does. It's like you're hearing harmony in music that you've never heard before. It's like something tells you that everything's cool with the universe, you're in the right place, the moon is smiling at you, and it's just a nice feeling. You again, it's a little bit further down the road of a personal relationship with the moon. You can anticipate its rising, and there's nothing like a big old oval waning gibbous moon coming up about 11 p.m. Or a crescent moon, a skinny crescent moon setting right after sunset. So there's a lifetime of stimulation there. A third level you can rise to, I think, if you stick with it a little bit. If you're into it so far, you may as well go to the next step. And that would be looking at things like Stonehenge and Native American earthworks and the ceremonial past of our people. All of our tribes back in the days, every single one of them on every continent, were people who watched the sky and wrung a lot of both religious, spiritual, and scientific information from it. And you can look at such bizarre things as major and minor lunar standstills, which is something that Native Americans were really into. And most of us have European ancestors that were totally oblivious to that whole part of the moon's personality. So, and that brings me up to the part where I turn the show over to Tom, because we're talking about Native American observatories and Stonehenges and things like that. Tom is a lot more knowledgeable than anyone else I know, myself certainly included, about what we call archaeoastronomy. So here you go, man.
Yeah, thanks. Evening. Well, I guess I don't have as many opinions about the moon, but folks have had a lot to say and do about the moon for a long time. I wonder if we could rotate the light off the screen just a tad. There you go. Anyway, what I've noticed is that everything we know about all our relationship with the moon really has to do with the relationship between the moon and the sun and ourselves, where we are, the moon is, and the sun is, because otherwise we wouldn't see the moon at all. It's just reflecting sunlight. And the sun does amazing things too. But anyway, when we see a little bit of the moon like that, it's because of where the moon is in relationship in its orbit around the Earth to the sun. And I personally have an affection for the crescent moon, waxing or waning. And you know, moons reflecting off of things. So let me just, I have a tendency to show way too many pictures to people, so, but I know you wanted to see them anyway. Here we have the moon just getting ready to occult the planet Venus there, and I think this movie has something to do with the occult. That's what I heard. So we'll see. The moon is often associated with the planets in the night sky and in mythology and in history. Anyway, the more you watch the moon, the more you're going to get to see. How many of you seen a halo around the moon? Hope so. Hope all you have. If you haven't, get out there and watch it. Here we have another relationship between the moon and the sun, and that would be an eclipse, an annular eclipse in this case, another one there. And then a total eclipse. How many of you saw that one last year? Oh, good. It's the first time I ever asked that question, saw more than one hand go up. That's very good. All right, so whenever you're looking at the moon, your tendency to look at the sky, and who knows what you're going to see when you look up in the sky. And you have to imagine back in the day, before, you know, BC, way before cable, when people were out after dark, they focused on the light, and the light was always the night sky. And the moon was the most dramatic thing in the night sky, and so people very early on started paying really close attention to it. And so we have evidence that people were carving the phases of the moon and tracking the moon in animal bones as long as 32 1,000 years ago. So the moon's been captivating human history. Here we have the phases of the moon painted on a wall in a cave in southern Europe. And possibly other things like the Pleiades up there over Taurus the bull. And it's not surprising then that folks were watching all the details in the sky. And so here we find old Babylonian cuneiform writing where they're tracking the motions of the planet Venus through the night sky when it appears and disappears. Star watching was the main hobby after dark for a couple thousands of years for humans. Who we got here? They're tracking Halley's Comet. This is back 1,000 years before Halley was born. Imagine that. And tracking the motions of the planet Saturn. So people were very keenly aware of this kind of thing. Here you can tell these people were fixated with the moon because they wore it on their head for eternity there. This is, ancient Chinese tracking the stars and phases of the moon as well. So following these things, watching their paths through the sky, watching the shadows on the ground has been a key part of human history and part of our experience, part of what we've inherited. Sometimes it takes us a while to realize what we've inherited. It's just in the last century or so we've been learning how much these folks knew. We always used to refer to ancient people as primitive folks. Now we're kind of impressed how smart they were. Anyway, so they stood a lot of rocks up. We're always impressed by how many rocks they stood up as well. Lots of them, drug them a long way, and lined them up so accurately that they could track the motions of things in the sky. I mean, that might look random, but you could do a PhD thesis on the alignments of these rocks and see what they're telling you about the night sky or the day sky. And so many of them. So I thought you wanted to see them all, so I didn't get them all, but of course Stonehenge being the most famous of them all, and a lot of work's been done on that, and we don't know exactly why they built it, and we don't know all the things it can do, but we know some of the things, and it clearly has some alignments to the moon and the sun and the behavior of those two objects. Here's a grave in Ireland, New Grange, 5,000 years old, and it's built such that at sunrise on the winter solstice, the sun comes and travels through a long, narrow corridor and lights up an image on a distant wall. This is up in Bolivia, high in the Altiplano, above the trees. This is the gateway to the sun. Of course, everybody thought the sun needed a gateway, so you build one. That was all one rock at one time. Hard to imagine. And then when we find about all the observatories down in Latin America, just phenomenal, popping up out of the rainforest. And when you study those, you find here's a pyramid that the steps cast shadows at sunrise on the equinox or the solstice, I forget which, that casts that serpentine shadow there that links up with this serpent's head. That might just be a coincidence, maybe. Anyway, here's an observatory down at Chichen Itza that it's been determined was built to follow and observe the motions of the planet Venus, which repeats its cycle in the sky every 8 years exactly. And they knew this a long time ago. Did you know this? Oh, they were smarter than most of us. I don't know how it works myself, but I know they do it. This is another thing down there that, the walls of these things, where they left the windows to let the light shine through on certain dates. That's some sort of, whatever it was for, because it's not obvious. It also has an astronomical connection. And then outside of Mexico City, we have the Pyramid of the Sun and the Pyramid of the Moon. Now there's somebody that's really caught up on the moon. Built a pyramid to it. So, see what else we got here. And these calendars based on the night sky. This is a pretty accurate thing. We don't exactly know how accurate it is because we don't understand it as well as we probably could. But we'd be surprised. Here's a place called Machu Picchu, high above the, this was so remote that it wasn't discovered till 1911 by Western folks. And it's pretty amazing how it's built. There's a rock with 12 sides, pretty good fit. And one of the centerpieces of this place is this object right here, carved right out of the bedrock. The Incan word for it is the Intihuatana, which is the nickname is the hitching post to the sun, and they could track the changing arc of the sun across the sky from day to day throughout the year with that thing. And of course, the Mayans tracked the motions of all these things as well. Everybody did. They're still looking. And you know, the more you look at ancient things, I think we have to look longer and longer and longer. And if we don't see an astronomical connection with the moon or something else, we have to keep looking, because it probably is connected. The biggest things we ever built seem to be built in alignment with the motions of the objects in the sky. Here's the Great Pyramid at Giza, aligned to the North Star and to Orion's Belt and to the bright star. Thuban, by the way, was the North Star at the time they built that. So a lot of work's been done on these things. A lot more has to be done. Orion's Belt, hopefully you've all seen that. Some people conjecture that the pyramids are an Earth-based representation of the belt stars of Orion. That might be far-fetched, and it might not. George and I chased an eclipse over there, and we kept seeing this sun here, or this winged object. They didn't have anything to tell us when we went on these interpretive tours, but there's a lot of eclipses that crossed the Nile Valley during the time of the pharaohs, and so some people think maybe that's a depiction of an eclipse, the winged sun. Maybe, maybe not. Look at the size of these rocks. I don't know if they have anything to do with the sun or the moon or anything else, but look at the size of those rocks. Just threw them in there. And they have stars on the ceilings of their tombs. I mean, they take the stars with them. They say you can't, but don't try. They lined up a lot of stuff, and they always seem to line it up with the sky. This is a solar chariot with 12 axles for the 12 signs of the zodiac. You know, doesn't, like George said, all over the world, all the cultures were following this stuff, watching it very closely and connecting it to the human condition. This is a sundial. That's a pretty nice sundial. Another thing to track the sun. This is out in the desert in the American Southwest. The Anasazi apparently tracked a supernova explosion in 1054 AD. People who studied it the most claim that's what it is. What do you think? Anyway, that's what exploded. Took a picture of it, I guess. That's what it looks like today. This is a pretty cool thing, the Fajada Butte out there in the Southwest. You know, there was a story on PBS. This gal was watching a program on archaeoastronomy, and then she was out here doing a dig, and they were up on the slopes there, and they took some lunch into the shade of these rocks here, and while they're sitting there, they spotted a carved spiral on the wall inside of there, and it turns out, she says, oh, I'll bet it has something to do with the stars, because I saw this program on PBS, and sure enough, it's called the Sun Dagger. Different times of the year, the thing hits the spiral at different points. Seems like you'd think people had something better to do than do this stuff everywhere all the time, because none of it looked like it was something you could do in like 20 minutes. None of it. You all been to Serpent Mound, hopefully. Biggest effigy earthwork on the planet Earth. In the 90s and aughts, they've studied this. Astronomers went over and took a look at it, and they're finding out that it has all kinds of interesting alignments with the solstice and the equinox, if you stand at certain bends in the body. And then some more research, they found that it's also built in alignment with this cycle of the moon that George was talking about. It's an 18.6 year cycle of the moon. Most of us in the modern era have lost track of the monthly cycle of the moon. You see the moon every now and then, right? But people watched it every day and every year until they saw that it repeats a cycle every 18.6 years. Now, it's a kind of subtle thing. But when you now know that, you can start to figure out how some of this stuff works and find that maybe you can start to understand why some of these things like these conjunctions in the sky of the sun and the moon happen. This is an earthwork up in Newark, Ohio, excuse me. I guess I'm not going to get this right here. Okay, it's the biggest geometric earthwork on the planet. Giant circle, octagon. This is a golf course today. And people are out there golfing, driving their little golf course, and I think they think that this was built for them to golf around. But anyway, it's 1,000 years older than that or more. And people came over to debunk the notion in the 70s that Stonehenge and other things like that could be used to predict eclipses of the sun and the moon. And so they started studying this very closely just to demonstrate that. And after many years, they couldn't find that it has anything to do with the sun. And it turns out, after many visits, that they found that this thing, too, is built in alignment with that 18.6-year cycle of the moon with the major and minor lunar standstills. It's a giant observatory, oldest one in Ohio. And then over in Dayton, there's one called Woodhenge, they call it Sunwatch Village. You know, people always been watching the sky. Till the modern era, we don't watch it so much. We got other things to look at. So, a lot of stuff built out west, too. I can't see what this is. I'm just going to go on. I told you I'd put too many. There's this interesting phenomenon. If you watch the sun and take a photo of it at the same time every day for a year, it makes this figure 8 in the sky. It's called the analemma. And people have been doing this for a long time. Well, you know, even before people had cameras, they were lining up rocks to portray that on the ground. So, you know, lots of people were trying to figure this stuff out. How does it all work? And the moon was a key player in all this because of what it does versus what all the other motions are of the things in the night sky. And so it was working this stuff out. It was pretty obvious that the Earth was the center of the universe for a long time because everything comes up in the east and sets in the west and goes around in the sky the way it does. But some clever people looking at it for a long period of time figured out all these abstract motions, and now we know how a lot of this stuff works. And we've built lots of different things to observe it. This is a little thing about the Halley's Comet woven into the biotapestry back in the Middle Ages. Some of my slides got out of whack here. This is a cool thing. This is called the Antikythera mechanism. They found this in 1904 from a shipwreck off the island of Antikythera in Greece, and didn't know what it was. It had a bunch of rusty gears in it. Well, it looks like it was made by somebody like Eratosthenes or somebody back in the Greek era, and this was something that kept track of the motions of the moon like nobody ever could have imagined that the Greeks knew. And a whole team of scientists spent a lot of time studying this thing. If you ever get to watch this on Nova, by all means do so. How they tried to figure out, why did this one gear have this specific number of teeth in it? It's the wrong number. And then when they figured it out, they thought, oh, wow, how did they know that? And they figured out. So you got to watch that. I can't explain it. It's better. They know more than I do about it. And they're dead. So anyway, even these guys building these big cathedrals build it in alignment in the sky so that the sun would shine on certain spots on certain days. You know, they're lining all this stuff up, even in the windows. Tycho Brahe, he helped us out a lot. You have to look him up with his big instrument that he used, his mural quadrant there, size of a wall. But the work he did allowed everybody after him to figure out that the planets moved in ellipses. And old Copernicus, boy, if he'd have said what he thought during his era, they'd have burned him at the stake. So he didn't say it. He just wrote it down and stashed it. Galileo, they almost burned him at the stake. Because he said, no, you come look through my spyglass, you'll see. Galileo, watch yourself. Anyway, eventually he didn't, and they wouldn't let him climb up the Leaning Tower anymore and drop stuff off. Put him under house arrest. This is another one of these sundials. Another sundial. This is all this stuff to keep track, just to keep track of what's going on in the sky. Oh, doubles. We've been so inspired by the night sky that, you know, most of the nations of the world have heavenly objects emblazoned on their national flags and coins and artwork. But we went on to build a lot of other things bigger than the sundials just to track this stuff, and I'm going to race through this stuff. Pretty impressive. They built big things in the old days, and we built bigger things in the new days just to get a little bit better edge on what we think we see in the night sky. And the moon drew us to a lot of that. There's that mechanism again. So, just some parting shots here. But them people carving images of the phases of the moon on animal bones 32,000 years ago are the ones that kind of set the stage for us to get to this stage of the game here. You've seen all these pictures before. The Hubble Space Telescope, connected to Meigs County, by the way. Ask me later. From the moon. I want to get to the end here. Trying to figure out, most of this was just to try to figure out where the Earth stands in the midst of all this stuff and how much the moon has played a key role to help us get to that understanding. Anyway, there's some moon pictures for you and some other stuff. George.
Yo. We got to switch. We got to switch files, I think.
Yeah.
Very good.
That's the slideshow.
That's me right there. Okay, so where's my remote? Don't I have a clicker? Is this it? Okay. So we were talking earlier about phases of the moon. This is what some of them look like. There's a couple off the screen at the bottom. You got to get out in the backyard and watch this happen, people. You can see the moon from any backyard in the face of the earth. And it's an inspiring thing to know what's going on, to observe it, to watch when the crescent moon goes by Venus, that kind of thing. Another interesting moon thing that we can see is when the moon is a thin crescent, you see the dark part glowing gently. How many of y'all have seen that before? Sometimes it's called the old moon in the new moon's arms. But it actually is, you've all heard of moonshine? Well, this, believe it or not, is earthshine. And well, it's named that because let's say you were right here. Let's say you have a vacation trailer on the near side of the moon. And you're out in the yard in a hammock. You see the earth hovering over your head in the sky 24/7. The sun rises and sets, the constellations come and go, but that earth sits there in the same place forever. It never goes anywhere, never rises or sets. And the earth that you see has phases just like the moon does for us. And it's always exactly the opposite phase. So when you see a crescent moon, if you were here in your hammock, you'd see nearly full earth. And that earth is so bright, shining on the hills and countryside all around you, that it lights it up. And off in the distance, we see the moon gently illuminated by earth shine. Swear to God, I'm not making that up. So here's another version of that 18.6-year cycle that Tom was talking about. And if you like moon phases and watching it rise in different shapes and different times of the year, then this is like a whole nother click. Then you come to realize you can actually personally, firsthand experience this in the sky in your neighborhood. It's going to take you 18.6 years to see the whole thing go down, but it is visible to the human eye. It's experienced by human beings, and it's a deep level of connection with the moon, I think. So moving on, one of the most profoundly cool things you could ever see is a total eclipse of the moon, and that's when the moon goes through the Earth's shadow. It looks like this quite often, beautiful reddish, amber, orange sort of color. And the next one of these we're going to see is in January 21st, coming up in 2019. So it'll be visible between about 10 p.m. and midnight here in Athens. I'm sure we'll have a public viewing at the Telescope Dome up on the old asylum grounds. And it's interesting to think about what you see, what it is that's happening here. You see the moon in the Earth's shadow. Why is it so orange? Well, it's because, as seen from the moon, the sun's behind the Earth, and all the sunset colors of all the sunrises and sunsets happening on Earth simultaneously are forming a circle around the Earth. The sun's behind the Earth, the atmosphere and the clouds are backlit. Just like pretty sunsets and sunrises are colors like this, that's what happens when the moon is in the Earth's shadow. That's what you see. So it's kind of neat to know that. Total eclipses, this is where we get into some heavy astronomy, trekking. You cannot go to astronomy heaven unless you have completed your sacred pilgrimage to the path of totality and stood in the shadow of the moon itself. We're not talking about a moon shadow like Cat Stevens did. You walk around the yard, there's a moon shadow. Well, this is the shadow of the moon itself. So, Tom, you want to come on up here with me? And this is an experience I've shared with this guy many times. We've been all over the place chasing eclipses. And just a couple of quick ones. The eclipse in Colombia that we went to back in the 1970s was cool because it was before the age when adventure rec people were making adventure vacations and featuring eclipses. Like when we were on later on, the more you get to the present time, the more adventure rec people, ads in the magazines, see an eclipse of the sun. Well, back in the day, you had to go to the village and stand in line at the bus station, get a ticket, and then ride to the next village. And we did that for 1 year in Colombia. And that would be, that eclipse is not on here. You can go to a website run by NASA, National Aerospace Institute, and you can find eclipses. So they know when they're going to occur for thousands of years ahead of time. Next one in North America is 2024. It goes through northeastern or northwestern Ohio, northern Ohio at any rate. And if you wait until 2099, the path of totality comes to Athens, Ohio.
Yeah, so if you want to plan your eclipse trips between 2081 and 2100, this is your map.
Right there, man. That's us. So this is what you're looking for. And how many of you guys saw this last summer? I know a lot of people who traveled down to Kentucky, Tennessee area
Like
to look at the.
More than half.
Yeah, good. Back in the early 70s, late 70s, excuse me, 1977, October 12th, the path of totality went across the Pacific Ocean, hit northern and eastern Colombia. So I'll do this part. When I said about going to the village and buying a ticket and getting on the bus and going to the next village, that's what we did for 6 days and nights. The third world changes your attitude about a lot of things. And people, level of prosperity in different countries, how lucky we are to be part of this country is one of those things. These guys are fortunate that they can run down a chicken or two now and then and eat them. Their urban cousins do not have that, even this level of prosperity. You really learn a lot about the human race and what it's been through, what it's still going through in different places. 6 days and nights over the mountains. A lot of erosion, a lot of naked hillsides with the rocks sticking out.
One of the things about chasing the moon's shadow, it's more than an astronomical expedition. It's always a geographical and a cultural expedition as well. You never know where astronomers do. They know where the moon's shadow is going to hit the planet, but it's hard to predict what the landscape's like beneath the moon's shadow as it moves across the surface of the Earth, and who are the people that it's going to go over, and what's life like for them. And if you put yourself in the moon's shadow enough times, you'll learn a lot about the planet Earth and the people who live on it and how to get different places.
So 10 or 15 minutes before totality, the gringos are all got their equipment out and they're facing towards the setting sun over top of the mountains in the distance, and everybody's ready. And when the moon finally covered up the sun completely, it all took place right behind this big black cloud. And when the next time the sun was visible, several minutes later, the eclipse was already over. So it's a nasty bad feeling when that happens, when you're clouded out. We were...
The duration of that total eclipse, well, we did stand in the moon's shadow for 29 seconds anyway, because even though the cloud was there, we were standing in the moon's shadow. And let me tell you this, there was a large crowd of people. I don't know if you saw some of those in the picture. And even though you couldn't see the outer atmosphere of the sun, and you couldn't see the eclipse itself, you couldn't help but to experience it. You got goose pimples all over your body, the hair stood up in the back of your neck, and all those people started hollering and hooting. It was sort of like some primal utterance that they were all trying to, I don't know, chase the dragon away and bring back the sun. I don't know. Nobody orchestrated that, but it happened, and I've seen that happen pretty regularly when we've found ourselves in the shadow like that. Might be a genetic thing.
Yeah, so this is building up to the next eclipse. I've got images from 4 more eclipses on the slideshow here, but we're going to call it quits right now because there's a movie waiting to be seen. The next time you can stand in the shadow of the moon is in the year 2024, and you got to drive up to Lima or Findlay or even Cleveland to see the show. And I'm planning to be down here somewhere where the skies are not cloudy all day. So have a good one, and if you saw the one this last summer, I'll bet you're going to do anything you can to see the one in a few years. This is the 1994 annular. Tom and I went to the shores of Lake Erie to see, whoopsie, wrong one. I think we're going to call it quits right now. We could go, well, obviously, George and Tom can go on like this for a couple more hours, but we're going to let it go now.